We are going to sort of reflect upon sort of the large-scale assessments. We will discuss how national assessment practitioners and global experts sort of can draw from this resource to sort of to think about sort of the global growth in large-scale assessment activities, to reflect upon how the increased use of large-scale assessments can inform system-level decision-making. We can sort of look into how sort of the critical role the large-scale assessments can play in global efforts to monitor learning, and sort of really sort of delve into the current gaps in the global monitoring of learning outcomes across the world. There has been huge investments and policy reforms that have been informed by large-scale assessments, and ultimately, sort of how can this ignite the transformations needed for education systems? We have a super distinguished lineup of panelists. So first and foremost, thank you all for joining us today. And also a special thanks to the Reed Trust Fund and the Russian Federation who generously funded it, that's been supporting global public goods in learning assessments activities for almost a decade now. Let me first introduce our co-authors, which will be sort of describing sort of the main lessons from the report. Marguerite Clark is our senior education specialist here at the World Bank, and Diego Luna Basaldúa is also an education specialist. So Marguerite and Diego, to you.
Thank you very much, Luis, and thank you very much for our panel of experts who are here with us today for the book launch. My name is Diego Luna. I will do a very brief presentation and then pass over to Marguerite. As Luis mentioned, we want to start acknowledging and thanking the Rush Education Aid for Development Trust Fund that generously sponsored the publication of this book. Over the years, READ has been key in developing global public goods on assessment of learning and for learning. Likewise, READ has been a key instrument to support countries in the implementation of large-scale assessment studies. For more information about READ, please visit the website that appears on the screen right now. Let me start talking a little bit about the motivation behind this book and about the relevance of large-scale assessments. Large-scale assessments of educational achievement provide information to policymakers and other stakeholders on the overall levels of student achievement in an education system for specific subjects and for students in specific school grades. Depending on the number of countries that take part of these studies, these are classified as national, regional, or international large-scale assessments. In these studies, we don't focus about the performance of one individual student, but rather we aggregate information of all the students taking part of the study to get a snapshot of performance at the system level. The information produced by these assessments can help to guide reforms to improve teaching and learning at the system level, identify factors linked to student achievement, monitor learning progress over time, setting learning targets to reach certain goals in the education system, and monitor learning at the global level. However, all these optimal uses can only happen when the large-scale assessments are designed in a technically sound manner. Results are properly analyzed and communicated to a wide stakeholder audience. Unfortunately, this is not always the case. Thus, policymakers and other stakeholders need in dire need of guidance to improve the assessment practice and to use large-scale assessments effectively. This new book that we're presenting today comes in response to a huge demand from World Bank staff, clients, and other stakeholders for a concise, easy-to-read introductory guidance on the topic of large-scale assessments of educational achievement. The book includes 9 chapters that address frequently asked questions from people working in the field of large-scale assessments and users of large-scale assessment results. It focuses on the what, the why, the who, when, where, and how of large-scale assessments. It is meant to be a first-stop resource for those wanting to learn more about how to properly design, administer, analyze, and use large-scale assessment results. The book also reports on general trends that have been happening in the last 10 years regarding the use and implementation of regional and international large-scale assessments. Over to you, Marguerite.
Great, thanks very much, Diego. So the book contains a lot of information and messages. We encourage you to go visit the link and download it at the end of this launch. In the limited time we have available here, Diego and I just wanted to highlight 6 key messages from the book that we feel will be useful for today's launch. Now, the first 3 messages that you see on this screen are all about ways to create a better context for carrying out large-scale assessment in a country. The first message we want to convey is that the evidence and countries' experience shows that they can improve their capacity over time to carry out better quality large-scale assessments. It is possible. There's a formula for doing this and it works. And that formula involves putting in place the right policies, institutional arrangements, budget. It also includes training assessment staff and teachers so that you have people on the one hand who are able to design good quality test questions, and on the other hand, you have teachers who are able to understand and use the results. The second message we want to put across is that stakeholders need to be appropriately involved at all stages of the assessment. We talk about this in the book, and we use contrasting examples from Latin America and from New Zealand to really try to bring home this point. And we show the downside of what happens if you don't involve people like curriculum and developers or teachers in the design of test questions, or if you don't ask policymakers about the kinds of questions that they actually want to see answered by the data. Now, it might seem time-consuming to involve all of these stakeholders, but it really pays off in the end in terms of stakeholders being more likely to accept and use the results. Something else that's really critical is to have technically proficient and well-trained staff. Now, this is a weak area, though, that we see time and time again when we work with countries. It's important to know that it takes time to build up expertise in the area of large-scale assessment. It's not the same as designing an examination or classroom assessments. It's quite technical. It involves psychometrics, statistical sampling, and other techniques. So having a week-long training workshop for your assessment unit staff, it's not going to cut it. It requires ongoing training, and it also requires ensuring that staff, once trained, don't migrate to another part of the ministry or the government. You need to keep them in place. Another issue here we found is that a lot of countries still don't have any kind of university courses or programs in the area of large-scale assessment. So expertise often needs to be brought in from the outside, and this definitely needs to change. Our next 3 messages on the next slide, if we can move to that, focus on effective implementation, analysis, and use of large-scale assessments. The first message that we really want to convey here is the real value and importance that is attached to the background information that is part of large-scale assessment exercises. Some policymakers wonder, well, why do I need a large-scale assessment program? I already have a high-stakes examination that I use for determining whether students should graduate from high school or enter university. What's a large-scale assessment going to bring to the table that I don't already have? The fact is that large-scale assessments collect background information on students, schools, and teachers, in addition to information on student learning levels. Other assessments don't do this. And when you put that background information together with the information on student achievement levels, it helps people uncover important relationships between student learning outcomes and things like teacher training levels, textbook availability, the amount of time students spend doing homework, or whether students are attending school. And we've seen time and again, countries as diverse as Germany, Senegal, Jordan, and the Philippines have discovered really important insights about their education systems by looking at this link between the background data and student learning levels. And they've used this to implement important reforms. The next message you want to put across is the importance of presenting the findings in a relevant manner. And this means presenting the results in a way that people can understand and use. Countries that do this well, they go beyond just reporting an average percent correct or an average mark out of 100, and instead they relate the score to what it says about what a student knows and can do. And then they go further and they link that picture of what a student knows and can do to how it relates to the country's official curriculum and any minimum or desirable standards of performance they have. So once you make those links between the score, what a student knows, and the official curriculum, you can start having really meaningful conversations with policymakers, curriculum developers, teachers, and others. And of course, it also helps if you present these findings in a timely manner, and that means within a year after administering the assessment. The last message you wanted to convey here is that design decisions are not permanent. So many of the case studies we look at in the primer, they highlight that change is a constant when it comes to countries creating the optimal large-scale assessment program. Sometimes it makes sense to do a census assessment of all your students. Other times, a survey or a sample-based approach makes sense. Sometimes you want to look at how students are doing in reading and math. Other times, you also want to look at how they're doing in science or digital literacy. And Korea, who we'll hear from later, is an example of a country that has continuously adapted its large-scale assessment to accommodate its new emerging information needs. This is really important to keep in mind. But at the same time, you want to make sure that when you're making these changes, you also want to keep some kind of common core or common link across your assessments so that you're still able to look at trends over time. You just don't want to let that get in the way of being responsive to the new information needs. So those are just 6 messages we wanted to share. There's a lot more in the book. And if we go to the next slide, you can see here, you can find out lots more by downloading the publication. If you want just a short taste of what's involved, you can read the blog that Diego and I wrote about the primer. It's available in English, Spanish, and Russian so far. And you can read more about the bank's work on assessment or the retrustment program by clicking on these links. And we'll make this available after the launch. Thank you very much. Back over to Luis now and to the panel discussion.
Thank you, Diego, and thank you, Marguerite. So we're going to our first panel on regional and international large-scale assessments. We have a very distinguished group, Hilaire Humpodot. He is the coordinator of the Program of Analysis of Educational Systems of the CONFEMEN, Silvia Montoya, the director of the UNESCO Institute of Statistics, Jaime Saavedra, who's the director of the Education Global Practice here at the World Bank, and then Andreas Schleicher, who's the director of the Directorate of the Education Skills of the OECD. So the first question is, what are recent trends and issues in the design and implementation of regional and international large-scale assessments? And then Jaime, if you can just also share some thoughts about what the World Bank views as the key issues in this area. There will be 3 minutes for each panelist, and we'll start with Hilaire, then we'll go to Silvia, Jaime, Andreas, and then Jaime. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luis. I'm happy to be here. About this question, I think that learning assessment are an essential element in the management of education system. And in the CONFEMEN context, CONFEMEN member country, PASEC, which was set up in 1991, precisely in order to help a country to have an instrument that will provide them with indicator on learning achievement that would enable to strive their education system. And increasingly, assessment are seen as essential for improving the quality of education and for strengthening education policy. But trend in assessment, especially in Francophone countries of Southern Africa, are increasingly leading to the development of regional or international assessment or standardization of assessment. Thus, in the context of SDG4 and for indicator monitoring, PASEC-type assessment for Francophone countries are an important means by which they can monitor learning commitment of SDG targets. And a recent issue in the design of assessment mainly relates that the comparison of data published by the different programs, include data from national assessment, and a problem. And another question is that the competency that we assess, when we know that actually we are talking about 21st century competencies. And there are also issues related that the children with special needs to take in account of issue of equity. And we don't, not to mention that the too effective of use of data to manage the system. And the question is how countries actually use this data to plan a system and to plan the sector plan. And as far as the support of World Bank to country is concerned, we have noticed that for actually some countries that have beneficiated from a PASEC evaluation, benefited to the World Bank, and particularly in the first PASEC 2014 and 2019 evaluation, they have encouraged this country to have the financial support, and the World Bank support some country to participate of this evaluation, to pay the cost of evaluation and to have the data to plan the system. What I can do to the first question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hilary. Sylvia.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for the opportunity, and congratulations to the authors of the book. It's really very good input for some of the discussion. I would say that I will try to focus on some of the issues that I do think that are important. The first one is that the expansion of the international assessment, we see it with the South Asian primary learning metrics that has been actually come as a part of some of the responses to the needs of the SDG reporting, plus the foundational learning of mix and some other efforts that are around. It's clear that this is a very valuable source of information, and the SDGs has come to actually to serve. And I do think that this is one of the first issues that are cross-cutting on this utility. The fact that learning is at top of the agenda is a first indicator in the SDG 4. And I do think that is one of the first contributions that has happened in the last 5 years. The second one is one of the issues that the colleagues has mentioned from PASEC, our colleague and partner, is about the alignment of all the international and regional assessment to common definitions about what is a minimum proficiency learning level that is bringing to the center of the discussion what each child is entitled to learn, and also what the system should be teaching to those children in the world. And the fact that the regional and international assessment have tried to align, and there are concrete developments toward expressing one into another of projects such as the Rosetta Stone that we are actually carrying forward with the International Evaluation Association, the Laboratory of UNESCO, and with the confirmation that they're going to be scaling into each one another and put everybody on the same scale. I do think that is a huge step forward in trying to understand what are the differences under a common metric. The third point that I would like to flag that is also related to the SDG 4 agenda, to the global and thematic set of indicators, is that it has come to the attention that the large scale assessment are a very rich source of information for reporting on learning outcome, but also to reporting on other indicators that are the ones who are helping to explain what those learning outcomes are happening. I do think that efforts, obviously, as the IEA and OECD with PISA and TIMSS and peers has been the first kicking off point, but we know that some various indicators could be actually brought from large scale assessment, and I do think that is a huge development to have in the SDG 4 set of indicators the issue of bringing from learning assessment information about the school environment, information about professional development of teachers, information about bullying, and some other aspects that are critical to explain the learning outcome. So I do feel that this is a huge contribution that has come over the last year, and I do feel that this book and this contribution puts at the center of the table how large-scale assessment could help to improve, to inform not only outcomes, but also some of the other aspects in the system that could help to understand why we are observing those outcomes. So this will be my thoughts on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sylvia. Andreas.
Well, thank you, Luis, and also congratulations to the primer. I think this is something the world has been waiting for a long time. and it's going to help policymakers navigate a quite complex landscape here. I actually also think your primer provides many answers to the question you just asked us here. And let me just, add a little bit to what Sylvia and also Jan just said to stretch our thinking a little bit further. One of the biggest drawbacks of current large-scale assessment, in my view, is that they tend to sacrifice validity gains for efficiency gains, and often relevance for reliability. In other words, we tend to focus on things that are very easy and cheaply to measure, and we omit things that are really important but more difficult to measure. Now, if large parts of our current assessments can be answered by children in seconds with the help of a smartphone. If we want our children to be smarter than a smartphone, I think we need to go beyond whether students can simply reproduce facts and figures to see to what extent they can creatively use and apply their knowledge. And obviously that's much harder to assess. But I do think with digital tools now, we can actually be more ambitious in terms of more the task, hands-on assessment, simulated environment. I think the time is right to be more ambitious on this. Many large-scale tests today do not allow students to connect to the internet. People are worried that students will just look up their answers there. But I think we should design our future assessments such that students can access the world's knowledge and think about redefine validity in the digital age. I think that's really, really important. I also think we need to pay more attention to the measurement of social and emotional aspects of skills. One of the worst offenses in large-scale testing and most testing is, that we worry that people cheat and work with the neighbors. Well, the world rewards collaborative competences a lot, and I think we need to find ways to embed that better in assessment. We tried that with PISA with our work on collaborative problem solving. That's actually possible. I think, again, that's my first point, really. Strengthen validity, strengthen relevance. My second point, we need to work harder to build the gap, and that's also, I think, a recent trend between summative and formative assessments, and to build better bridges between local, regional, national, and international assessments. They're often too disconnected. Now, one of the biggest mistakes, in my view, we have made in the history of education is to divorce learning from assessment. We pile up lots of content and then we test it. And I think, again, with modern technology, we can reintegrate the world of learning and the world of assessment and provide more granular feedback to students to learn better, teachers teach better, systems to improve, and all at the same time. I also think that good assessments today shouldn't just see whether students get an answer correct, but we should get a better window into students' thinking. And once again, the latest PISA large-scale assessment tell us more about the process, how students got the answer right, than simply looking at the degree of correctness of their answers. So once again, I think very, very important, building better bridges. The last point is one that Sylvia also just made. It's, if we want assessment to lead to really policy changes, we need to connect the assessment with the collection of contextual data from students. This should not be bolted on, added on. This should be an integral part of, any assessment, large-scale assessment system. And this is certainly a recent trend as well, that, assessments try harder to understand the context in which students learn, teachers teach, and schools become better. Maybe, if I could add a fourth point, it's, going towards out-of-school assessment. We know a lot about the children that are in schools through large-scale assessment. We know very little about the many that are still excluded from schooling and therefore from large-scale assessment. And we have, tried some things in this field in PISA, but I think we need to do a lot better to bring everybody into a map if education is meant to be inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas. Jaime.
Thank you very much, Luis, and thanks to everyone for their participation, and many thanks to our Russian colleagues who, through the Reed Trust Fund, have been supporting a lot of the work that has happened globally on learning assessments. We launched less than 2 years ago what we called learning poverty. This simple indicator saying that trying to assess what's the percentage of kids who at age 10 cannot read and understand a text. and the number was 53%. And we said, well, look, we have a learning crisis here. Kids are in school, but they're not learning. Now, to come up with that statement, right, that sentence, right, that is very much linked to the worry that we have around the, I mean, are we going to be able to attain the targets of the SDGs, right, of quality education for everyone by 2030? To come up with that statement, the amount of data that is needed, it's incredibly large, because we said, well, to come up with this, we need to have comparable data, or relatively comparable data, right, in all countries about how our kids doing in terms of learning. And there we found that, unfortunately, the gaps that we have are still dramatically big, right? For sub-Saharan African countries, for instance, I mean, there's half of the countries for which we don't have data. And in many countries, even in which we have data in terms of learning, the data might be old, right? Or the data might not be representative of the whole country. So despite the progress that we have seen in the last 10 years, we still have huge gaps. And we really need to worry much, I mean, to work much in a much faster and in an accelerated way to make sure that we have learning data in all countries. If we don't have that, we're basically flying blind. With the data that we have so far, we already know that schooling is not learning, that the fact that kids are at school is great, that's an important, great step, but that doesn't assure anything. So the need to have learning data in all countries, that it's high quality and that it's available on time, it's absolutely essential, and we're still not there yet. Now, this is absolutely a critical priority for the bank. And I mean, as several have mentioned, we have been partnered with many of you, with OECD. I mean, a fantastic partnership with Andrea's team, with PASEC, I mean, with UIS, to continue building the capacity at the country level. And actually, that's what matters, that capacity at the country level, because measuring learning well requires a financial commitment, right? Because it's not an issue of let's have an international organization financing an assessment year one, because that could help, right? And again, that could help to start the process, but you really need to have a commitment, because this is a permanent function, right, of education systems. This is not a one-off. Second, you need to have a political commitment to this, because the results of a learning assessment could be bad news, could be showing that in the country, the levels of learning are much lower than you expected, or it could be that the levels of learning are extremely unequal within a country. So countries need to see this as a technical tool, right? But that it's technical and at the same time and extremely complex, but at the same time has to be shared with the whole education system, right? Such that teachers can see this as an instrument that could allow them to improve the quality of their work. And finally, in addition to the financial commitment, to the political commitment, it's really extremely strong technical commitment, because as Andreas was saying, these are instruments that have to be innovated and I mean in a permanent fashion, but both in terms of the tools that we use, but also in terms of the areas in which we need to assess. Right? We have been assessing foundational learning, literacy, numeracy, and it's critical. And we don't have the right data for all countries yet. But we need to add to that battery social-emotional skills and other aspects of learning that are absolutely essential. And that technical challenge of implementing and rolling out legitimate and well-crafted assessment across the country is a very complex logistical endeavor, right? But that's something that it's a critical commitment. And finally, this technical commitment implies that we're always of a very strong linkage in terms of what is assessed, right, and what's happening in the classroom, right, and in which way the data that we get regarding the level of learning of our children is permanently feeds back, right, into what the local levels and the schools know about the levels of their achievement, and also how can they improve the quality of their work. So that integration between assessment and the teaching and learning practice is something that is a critical technical challenge for all of us, and we need to pay attention to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jaime. And so we'll go to the second question of our panel. Where are the biggest gaps in the global monitoring of learning outcomes, and what can be done to improve that situation? And we start with you, Hilar.
Thank you very much. For me, in the global monitoring of learning assessment and related to the first question, we should notice that enough countries are increasingly participating in standardization assessment from visit assessment, regional or international, such as PASEC, SACMEC, PISA, as part of the global monitoring of results, there is still the question to how to compare the results. For example, the example of Sylvia, what can compare PASEC scale to SACMEC scale or PISA scale, etc. And in 2012, PASEC has initiated a discussion with SACMEC to find an anchorage point to compare the result of French-speaking country and to those English-speaking countries that participate in SACMEC. This issue is still relevant for us. And moreover, the issue has been discussed during recent meeting with Global Alliance to Monitor Learning and with the support of UIS. A project called the Rosetta has been set up between PASEC and the EAR in order to probably set up a correspondence for a table correspondence for PASEC skills and teams of PERS results. The results should be available before the end of this year, I think. And the UIS is working with all partners to find the methodology, correct way to address the issue of comparison and monitoring. In addition, we must notice that there are still many countries who do not have a national assessment system or do not participate in any regional assessment, sometimes because of financial resource. And I think that is a major problem. We believe that it is important that the World Bank accompany countries and encourage them to carry out assessment if we really want the country to have evidence of the assessment in 2013. It is also necessary to support countries in setting up a sustainable evaluation system by strengthening capacity of the actor, because if the actor don't have the capacity building, it is difficult for them to evaluate the system or to manage the political issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hilar. Sylvia.
Thank you so much for the question. And I do think that I will mention some of the points that Jaime has already highlighted very clearly. I do think that there are financial, technical, and institutional constraints. Also, Margaret has mentioned in her brief introduction to the primer. I do feel that the first issue, that is the financial, it has to be actually taken a look at something that it should be a clear program and plan of action, at least for a decade. I would think to try to settle a program of assessment. We have many data gaps. Unfortunately, these data gaps are in the regions that we know that for some of the countries that are already participating and submitting data that are in the very low level of achievement, and we really need to have this information to guide and to assess and to support on their policy making. And for that, we really need to build a financial commitment and a commitment of a coalition of the willing, as it has been called, to try to take this forward. And I do think that some of support to that is also to try to understand where the donors' money is going and where are duplication, and avoid leakages, and avoid to have this issue that in some cases they have one shot, or the country having 2 or 3 donors supporting for a 2 or 3 years period, and then after that there is no support to continue on the work. The second one is related to the institutional constraints that the countries are having in terms of their bureaucracies and the need to build that capacity at the country level. We really need to find a way to technical programs that are building this capacity, but also this transfer of knowledge to the global south. in particular, and try to build and to try to create also the research level and in universities and technical partners to try to see if we could create that capacity, because at the end of the day, it's also about the ownership and how it is developed and how this co-creation and this moving forward could be created. The third point relates to issues that are related to the availability of technical tools. As I mentioned before, there has been some expansion, but still there is no one size fits all. We need to actually to have a menu of options and different possibilities for the countries to join and to find a way to link the effort they are doing to a global scale. For this reason, we have made some progress in developing of methodologies that are not eventually in some of the cases as precise as we would like to have, but that are actually allowing us to make reflection and actually to build from there. But at the end of the day, to treat this as a market, a little bit increasing transparency and the generation of global public goods that are allowing that everybody could actually have some options until the point that everybody could build forward and try to report. So I do feel that these are the three main areas that we have and the gaps that we need to be dealing with. And if not, it's going to be impossible if we don't build a serious program of action that has the financial component, the technical component, and dealing with some of the failures in this market component. And if not, it's going to be impossible to address the gaps that we're seeing right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Let's go to you, Andreas.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, I don't have so much to add to Sylvia. I think she framed that really well. One thing is just sometimes, the perfect is the enemy of the good. Maybe we as international players have to become more creative how to create global public goods that are better compatible and easier to implement. And sometimes, even make some, create some pathway for the technical quality. I do think the barriers for implementing large-scale assessments are currently unnecessarily high. That had its reason when we had paper-based assessment, complex administration procedures. I do think today we should aim for a more flexible approach, one framed around global public goods. I want to add also one point and come back. I think the out-of-school assessment is for me a really, really, really big gap for many countries. And when you move beyond primary schooling, so many young people are not in school, and we need to find ways to include them. And again, I think the time is right to do this. There are also many aspects of the SDGs for which current, global assessments provide no answers, and we should find those answers together. I believe with a little bit of creativity, nationally, internationally, we can do that. I don't think it's so much just a question of money. It's perhaps more a question of, can we build better tools that make more sense? The second part is, obviously, how you make this happen. And I do believe actually the primer that you just published provides a lot of really good ideas for this. And as Margarita also said, it is very much about getting global stakeholders together. This is not just about a minister, making a decision, oh, we run, PISA or TIMSS or something. No, it's about building a strong coalition. And I experienced this actually when we did PISA in Central America. In countries like Ecuador, we had, within one PISA cycle, we had 3 changes of government. The reason why PISA continued was not, despite changes in government, was because you had people from the business sector, people from civil society, even the teacher union knocking on the door of governments and say, where are we with this? Where is this continuing? And then the ministry said, oh yeah, by the way, we're putting this on track. I think, that is so important to take the time to build a strong coalition that understands the value of assessment. Global assessments play 2 roles. They increase the political cost of inaction. They put out data so that actually, there is pressure on public policy, and actually that works really well. But they can also decrease the political cost of action. They can make it easier for policymakers to take difficult decisions, difficult trade-offs. And again, building those aspects into the design of strategies, I think is very, very important. And the last point also, I think the primer says it all. It's about building better technical capacity. Once again, you can easily parachute an assessment into any context, and but it's not going to stick. If you want to make it stick, and we learned this with our PISA for Development program, sometimes it takes 4 or 5 years. building that kind of front-end capacity, having a group of local researchers that actually understand, the tools, that develop them, starting with item development workshops, rather than just, printing a test and then rolling it out with a sample, work with people to develop tasks so that people understand what is actually being measured, that teachers are on board. If your stakeholders do not buy the assessment, nobody is going to accept the results. So I think actually, those for me are very, very important ingredients to cover some of the gaps that we see. Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas. Back to you, Jaime.
Thanks, thanks, Luis. And I will end up reiterating some of the points that Hilaire, Andreas, and Sylvia made. But I want to emphasize a few. One is the need to change mindsets, right? And the need to make sure that there is a demand for this at the country level, that there is a demand for an understanding of what's happening with learning. And that's something that is very heterogeneous. It's very clear and established in some countries, but it's not in many others. And it's obviously a push that the Ministry of Education can make, but you really need to have, as Andres was saying, I mean, people from the business side, teachers, parents, all having an understanding that they need to know what's happening with learning. And that's not easy, right? Sometimes there might be the misconception of parents that say, well, my kid is going to school, so he must be learning or she must be learning. And it could be a surprise for parents to know, well, that's not really happening. And that's something that it's not really installed in many countries. And we really need to continue working relentlessly on saying we cannot fly blind. We need to worry about what's happening with the real outcome of education. The outcome of education is related how kids are learning in the breadth of skills that we are interested. It's not enough to know how many teachers have been trained, right? Or how many books and tablets have been bought. So this change in mindset, it's absolutely critical. Second is the linkage between the international exercises that have a lot of political value, as Andrea was saying, but they must be linked to the national process, right? If that doesn't happen, then it will be a one-off thing. So that linkage with both dimensions is absolutely essential, the national and the international. Third is the strengthening of partnerships, right? Of many of the players that are actually in this call, and build what Sylvia was saying, this program of action, right? That is critical in order to expand the work. From the World Bank perspective, and we are working with 50 countries, right? In terms of providing different types of support to help in their learning assessment process. But the depth is not enough, and the scale and the reach is not enough in terms of number of countries. So this joint work, this joint program of action that Sylvia is insisting that we're working with UIS and UNICEF and UNESCO and other partners, and OECD obviously is absolutely essential. And the two final points is one is, as part of this partnership of different international organizations, work more on global public goods that can make life easier of people who are implemented national efforts. And the final point is that we really need to be pragmatic, and countries need to be pragmatic. Sometimes you cannot measure everything that you wanted to at the beginning. Maybe it's too difficult to do social emotional skills and out of school children now. Okay, so let's do what we can. Right? Let's be pragmatic. Start with what's possible at the country level, build the capacities at the country level, and start growing step by step. Sometimes there's this idea of say, look, education is holistic. Hence, if we measure only literacy and numeracy, we're only measuring one part of education, and that's bad. Let's not do anything. Right? That's a big mistake. Let's start with some of the indicators that we can measure, and then we expand. Let's be pragmatic, but let's make sure that we put the outcome at the center, and that we worry about as an education community to make sure that all countries know what's happening with the learning of their kids. Thank you very much, Luis.
Thank you, Jaime, and thank you again, Hilaire, Andreas, and Sylvia. So let's move to the second part of our panel. We're going to be talking about national large-scale assessments. And just a reminder to everybody, we're just only skimming the surface on all of these topics, and there's a lot more in the primer that I hope that you all have a chance to take a close look at. So we're going to be delving into 5 case studies. We have Jimin Cho, senior researcher at the Korea Institute for Curriculum and Evaluation. Then Assumpta Matei, the coordinator of the National Assessment Center in Kenya. Mónica Ospina Londoño, the general director of the Instituto Colombiano para la Evaluación de la Educación. Shayan Prasad Acharya, the technical officer of the Education Review Office in Nepal. And Huzam Saman, the president of the Education and Training Evaluation Commission in Saudi Arabia. Welcome to all. And the question that we'll start with is, how have national and international large-scale assessments results have informed national education policies in your countries? Each panelist will have 3 minutes to discuss, and we'll start with Nepal.
Thank you very much for the very important question. Education Review Office of Nepal has been implementing national representative large-scale assessment since 2011 in grade 3, 5, 8, and 10 by using item response theory in a very large sample, approximately 48,000 students and up to 1,800 schools every year. We are very lucky to have international technical support at the beginning of 2011 to 13. Afterwards, ERO is conducting national assessment with its own efforts. Since 2018, we have made the national assessment very robust by using rotated test booklets, plausible values, scale score reporting, PPS and complex sampling methods, proficiency descriptors, and comparing results over the time. So we are also planning for policy linking at the after national assessment with global proficiency framework for reporting SDG 4.1 indicators. We are exploring the capacity development of ERO in this area. Regarding informing policy with assessment results, I'd like to say assessment results are seriously consulted while formulating the education policies in Nepal. School sector development plan has taken assessment as a progress monitoring tool, and it is linked with the quality related indicators. Moreover, every year, honorable minister and policy level officers are involved in the discussion on NASA results, this national assessment results and recommendations. Recently, Ministry of Education, Science and Technology has assigned ERO to recommend actionable policy reform strategies for upcoming education sector plan. I would like to share you all that ERO has published so many reports till today, giving many recommendations for the policy level and for teachers level and for implementing agency levels as well. I believe everyone are closely following the assessment results. However, there are some challenges to link recommendations to the policy and implement these policies in present federal context in Nepal. Right of implementing education policies is constitutionally assigned to the local government. There is a risk of poor coordination between the federal policy and local implementation. You know, commitment from politicians to the teacher matters the most, I suppose. So when without visible improvement in the classroom behavior, we cannot say our policy, our assessment have worked. So I think the commitment is the major part in this regard. Regarding the international assessment, we haven't participated in international assessment yet. Maybe in future we may participate in future. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Acharya. Now let's go to the case study of Kenya. Dr. Matei.
Thank you, and I wish to congratulate the two authors of this great book. I'm just going to share a few insights on what Kenya is doing and has been doing and how these large-scale learning assessments have really helped us keep up with the policy concerns in education. I want to say that Kenya has been participating in large-scale assessments since 1995, when it did the first cycle of the SACMEC. And to date, we are actually now participating in the 5th cycle of the SACMEC. Other than this regional study, Kenya has its own national assessment system for monitoring learner achievement, where we undertake assessments at grade 3 and also at Form 2. Form 2 is an equivalent of grade 9. And of course, we have other grades in between. We have grade 7, and we have also other assessment at grade 2 in form of early grade mathematics assessment, which actually we have done 3 cross-sectional studies. That is the baseline, the midline, and the endline study, all of which were being supported by the GPE with supervision of the bank. We have also undertaken the EGRA study, the EGRA that is at grade 1, 2, 3. That is a program, we call it in Kenya Tusome, that is let us read. And this one, of course, Kenya is doing in partnership with the USAID. All of these are geared at improving in reading and also mathematics. I want to say that our colleague talked about ending learning poverty, and Kenya is one of the countries that are really determined to try and alleviate this learning poverty. And we are undertaking a study for 10-year-olds. In fact, the main study we'll be doing in May, that is the 3rd week of May, this ending learning poverty. Again, one of the key assessments that Kenya has participated or has implemented in the past 3, 5, 6 months is actually an assessment which was census, and it is the largest in scale after the COVID-19 re-entry. And I want to say that through this assessment, Kenya has come to believe that assessments can really inform learning and also improvement in learning outcomes. We did these assessments for grades 1 to 8. And if you have been keeping tabs of what is going on in Kenya, when we announced our KCP results or Kenya Certificate of Primary Education results, the public schools had really improved. And what led to this? We have had a policy in Kenya since 2015, where we have been providing school specific reports for the assessments that we have been doing. And this program is under the School Improvement Program, which has been supported by the GPE and of course supervised by the bank. Through this program, and this is actually maybe the example I'll be giving because of time, through this program we had 4,000 schools which were low performing, and they were given interventions, specific interventions. And one of the key interventions was to provide school-specific reports for these schools. Why? So that the schools can see where the problem is, where the learning gaps were per subject, and so that they can institute measures into improving on this. So through the school improvement planning or program, schools were given, were facilitated to prioritize. And the KCP school specific reports were used as a tool to prioritize, where schools saw that, for example, if they were not doing well in reading, the schools bought readers, and then their learning outcomes in reading were meant to improve. And I want to report that since 2016, we have provided school specific reports from 2013. And the schools that were under this program really improved. And I want to say that this was also scaled up to all the public and private primary schools in Kenya, and it has borne a lot of fruits. One would say there has been a turnaround, not only just in the learning outcomes, but also in accountability and school management. Through this program, schools were also supported to train their teachers, their board of management in a prudent utilization of resources. So we are saying that it was not just on learning outcomes that Kenya has been focusing on with support from GP and the World Bank, but also accountability. The first presenter and this publication shows that other than learning outcomes, there are contextual factors, you know, the predictors of learning that every country has to take as policy concern. And this is what Kenya is trying to do to see how best they can mitigate against all the other factors that impede acquisition of learning outcome. And I want to say that through the GP COVID-19 Learning Continuity in Basic Education project, we leveraged on this, on the school improvement program, and gave each school from grade 1 to grade 8, over 10 million learners, we gave each school a specific report that they used to address the learning gaps. And of course, we saw a lot of improvement in Kenya during that high-stake examination, whose performance was informed by the learning assessment, which we administered sometimes in November after reopening. I want to say that teacher education and teacher professional development is key to Kenya and is key to the acquisition of learning outcome. And the recent or past NASIMLA studies have reviewed gaps not only in pedagogy, but also in teacher attendance. So through the same intervention by GPE with supervision of the bank, there has been training of teachers in early grade mathematics methodologies, and that has really improved the learning outcomes of learners at grade 2 learners significantly, for example, in subtraction, which has been a very big challenge. Another support, of course, teacher support is teacher professional development and appraisal, where teachers were trained again and also appraised. You know, there was a specific tool that teachers were appraised on, of course, depending on different parameters. And of course, recent studies, for example, the class 7 study, and also the last grade 3 study showed that teacher performance has really, really improved. One of the key highlights, and I want to highlight this before I end, is the school-based teacher support, which actually has a lot or has borrowed a lot from the school improvement planning, where we are giving teachers specific support at school level. This one, of course, is supported by the World Bank and the GPE under the school, under the Kenya Secondary Education Quality Improvements Project, that is the SEQIP, and the Kenya Pride Project, which is also funded by the GPE. And through this program, which is actually, I know we have had very rigorous, sessions on the school-based teacher support. Teachers are able to support each other on peer support, lesson studies, cluster meetings, virtual meetings, and action research. And of course, we have curriculum support officers who are monitoring and supporting curriculum implementation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
And as we move to the case study of Colombia with Dr. Ospina, I've also sort of taken the opportunity to introduce and ask participants to reflect on how countries can implement and use large-scale assessments to make education systems more equitable and resilient, given sort of the current shocks, particularly in mind sort of the COVID-19 pandemic. So Dr. Ospina, back to you.
Thank you. First, I want to thank the World Bank, especially Diego and Marguerite, for the invitation to be part of this important panel. And I'm glad to share Colombia's experience, but also to hear about other countries' implementation and use practices of large-scale assessments. Colombia has a long tradition of large-scale assessments. For more than 50 years, ICFES has been implementing large-scale assessments, and we evaluate nearly 2 million students along all education levels. Our exams are called Prueba Saber, being Saber 11, our main test. This test is mandatory for all students at the end of the upper secondary level, and it's a requirement for admission to higher education programs in Colombia. It is also the main source of information for scholarships and student loans for private and public universities, as well as for the government. Universities and higher education institutions also use this data to model dropout and other academic variables. Finally, these results provide valuable information of the whole school system for rankings, learning gaps, and the identification of factors associated with students' learning. We also evaluate the higher education level. We have two exams, Saber TIT for vocational and technical training programs, and Saber Pro for university degrees. Both are a requirement for graduation. Finally, we have other assessment applied to all the students at 3rd, 5th, and 9th grades. However, they are not national mandated tests. All these evaluations have provided the country with a comparable, reliable, and pertinent data to guide policies to improve education quality and to inform private and public resources allocation at the national and local levels. At ICFES, we are also making efforts to generate assessment results useful to all our stakeholders. For example, we have a national day, it's called DIA, where teachers and school leaders use assessment data to better guide their classroom and their school management practices in order to improve learning outcomes at the school level. Additionally, the Saber 11 and Saber Pro results are used to inform higher education policy through a value-added model that measures the institutional effect of the students' learning in each academic program. Finally, we have an open data repository called Data ICFES to make the data available for the research and academic community. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ospina. So why don't we now move to the case of Saudi Arabia, Dr. Saman.
Good afternoon, everybody, and I'd like to thank the World Bank for inviting me for this book launch, and also congratulate the authors for this achievement. In Saudi Arabia, ETIC, the Education and Training Evaluation Commission, is the independent national body responsible for education evaluation. We carry on the large-scale national assessment, as well as the implementation of the international large-scale assessment as well. Since 2003, Saudi Arabia has participated in TIMSS, following that with PERS, later on with PISA and TALIS. Also, we have the national framework for assessment on which we design and implement the national assessment for grades 4 and 8 as well in reading, math, and science. About informing the policymakers, I think there are different steps that we are taking by the end of each assessment, starting with communicating the results with the national bodies as the Ministry of Education, in the case of Saudi Arabia. This is something very important. We hold a meeting with the top leaders in the ministry, sharing the results, explaining the whole procedures, get them buy-in with the results, and accepting on the general statement to be taken to the public. Then we expand and raise the interest of different stakeholders and calling attention by designing many workshops, calling for seminars, webinars. Participants in these workshops are very varied, from school administrators, teachers, some faculty members from schools of education, in addition to some of the representatives from different ministries, ministries of education, Ministry of Higher Education, Ministry of Human Resources, Finance, just to expand the interest. As Margaret said in her introductory presentation, these large assessment studies, they are not just tests or exams with measuring student performance. They are providing information beyond that, that might be of interest to many different stakeholders other than just the teachers and the parents, or it might be of interest for psychologists, for people dealing with about the social safety, other issues. So we need to expand the interest of different stakeholders. Also, we are sharing the data. This is very important aspect of ethic mission, is to share the data of this large scale assessment, engage more researchers from universities, from colleges of education to be part of this national project, and continuously updating different boards of education policies about the outcome of these activities. In the case of Saudi Arabia, we have the HDCP, which is the Human Development Program under Vision 2030. We have a steering committee presenting from different ministers, education, finance, commerce, human resources, communications. They are continuously informed and updated about the results of these activities and the outcomes that came out of it. We need to be sure that different stakeholders in the kingdom, that they are participating, they are interesting in this assessment. They sure that we be sure that they continuously have the issue of education, the issue of student achievement on their agenda. It is not just a seasonal issue that comes, and goes around the time of test. So it's a project under process, and it's to be continuing and developed and improved. So this is basically main point about informing the policymakers about education reform in Saudi Arabia based on large-scale assessment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Saman. And now for the case study of Korea, Dr. Cho.
Hello, everyone. Hey, you can hear me? Okay, I'm Jimin Jo from Republic of Korea. First of all, thank you for the invitation and congratulate of the launching of the very important book. I'm really happy to share our experience how national and international assessments, large-scale assessments, informed our national education policy. To tell you the conclusion, we are very good at using the reliable and valid data or evidence to establish education policies. Actually, for that, our government actually established the government-funded non-profit research institutions. We do not belong to the Minister of Education. We belong to the Prime Minister. And what that means is that we can raise our own research questions based on the needs or demands from the many stakeholders in our country. And then we did the research and we collect the data, and then we can provide all those reliable valid data to the decision makers. That is the very important aspects that we do have. And also in our institution, we do have, we can build up the reciprocal cooperations among the curriculum and the teaching and learning and assessments. What the mean is that, as we know, that very important, the three elements in education is going to be the, what Korean students know, what can, Korean students can do. That is going to be the curriculum, and also teaching and learning and an assessment. And what I'm saying is that, like Margaret says us, that assessment itself is not our educational goal, but very great tool for us to reach out to, achieve our educational goal. Because our goal is going to be, the assessment should support the directly, indirectly, the students' growth and development. And then in Korea's case, from the first cycle, especially for the international assessment, from the first cycle, we have joined in with the PISA and the IEA teams. And then in NAE, our National Assessment of Educational Achievement has been started in 2001. So it's been 20 years for us to start NAEA. And as I just want to make one very important point is that in our institutions, our researchers, we trying to build up sometimes combining or comparing all those 3 levels of assessment results to draw the proper implications for our stakeholders in our country, not only for the decision makers, but also the other stakeholders like teachers and parents and students. And then most important thing is that after we implemented the assessment at the national or international level, we need to interpret the proper way, and then to transfer all those valuable information to disseminate to the each stakeholders. So in our country, all the assessment results at the national and international levels, people can easily access, and then can look at, and then getting information, based on the various of in-depth analysis by researchers like a KAIS. So in assessment, the results, the most important thing is going to be how we can transport the right interpretation of the result to the stakeholder is the most important part that we are very much focusing on in our studies. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cho. And since we have a few more minutes, maybe we can sort of return to the case study of Colombia and inquire about how large-scale assessments have been put to work for a more equitable and resilient education system given the recent pandemic shocks.
Thank you. Okay, during COVID-19 crisis, our institute was confronted with several challenges regarding the continuity of our work. On one hand, we asked ourselves how to be resilient and continue with the assessment calendar. And we have the big responsibility of providing comparable and reliable data to our country. On the other hand, we were aware that the COVID-19 crisis will affect our students' learning outcomes, as they have been out of school for a long time, and there are important gaps on technology access and use among students and teachers. To overcome these challenges, we worked with the Ministry of Education on different inquiry solutions to reach all students, including these with special needs, and also covering the whole country. So, for Saber 11, we implemented a paper-based using rigorous biosecurity protocols, but we also learned that technology offers a new possibilities to implement large-scale assessments under the current situation. The institute managed to maintain the implementation of Saber TIT and Saber Pro exams through electronic applications in order to give continuity of the reporting of the results as an input to measure the quality of the education in the country. So to guarantee the access to computer-based assessment, we offer 2 modalities. On-site assessment is an online, offline sessions following the biosecurity protocols, and computer-based home test. We carry out for the first time a home-based large-scale assessment, keeping the desirable statistic quality of the standardized test. Technology enabled us to reproduce the same control environment that is required when applying paper-based assessment. First, identity recognition and validation via artificial intelligence, surveillance via proctoring technology, and real-time support to the students via a chat box. Online testing also helped us to achieve our goals, as we covered 10 more times series with online testing that we did as a paper-based version. We also use the ICT to design an online and offline strategy called Evaluar para Avanzar. This is a strategy that offers a set of evaluation tools based on our traditional instrument to diagnose and follow up the students' progress in the learning on basic competences for each grade level and academic subject. We provide instruments for all grades between 3rd grade and 11th grade. It also provides perception of students about their socioeconomic, socio-emotional skills and the condition of the environment in which they live and the factors that change in the face of the crisis. Finally, the Institute is committed to measure and report information related to quality of education system, even in the challenges of pandemic. So all these efforts were appointed to provide the information and to have all the data that we need on the learning, students learning, even for the 2020 and the pandemic crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ospina. Dr. Yocharia, perhaps if you can offer some very brief reflections on Nepal and how it relates not just to the pandemic, but also to the situation of natural disasters.
Could you please repeat the question?
If you can just offer some reflections about the case study of Nepal as it relates to the pandemic as well as to natural disasters.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And globally, COVID-19 pandemic and other natural disasters occur all of the sudden. I believe any country cannot compromise the right of the children to get equitable quality education, even in the difficult situation. Nepal administered more than 10 large-scale assessments till the date. The national assessment results from the previous round have made it clear that there are disparities in learning level across the gender, socioeconomic status, geographical and ethnic groups. Though these disparities are expected to widen as a result of pandemic, we have not conducted a national assessment this year. However, we are planning to conduct large-scale assessment in March 2022, and preparatory work is going on. This analysis is expected to shed light on how effective school classes run through mass media, television, like television, radio, online, offline, satellite classes, community-based sport teaching places, in making education system more equitable. Based on the study results, we plan to provide actionable recommendation to different level of governments and other stakeholders to ensure learning and reducing disparities across the different groups. We have developed a methodology of identifying numerical differences between intended curriculum and achieved curriculum. We believe this method will also be useful in identifying the need and providing equitable support to the needy students. We are also exploring how can we measure learning loss and effective way of making education system more equitable in a result of COVID-19. In the meantime, to capture learning through the various modes, Education Review Office is looking for alternative approaches of assessing students using online, phone-based, and school-based methods. ERO has piloted phone-based assessment for the ELBS children to identify their preparedness in the school education. We believe this phone-based assessment will be also useful in the pandemic situation in Nepal. Thank you very much for the authors for this book and the World Bank for launching this book. I believe this book will support everyone to enhance all type of assessment in this pandemic situation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saman, and that was very kind words. And now, Dr. Achari, I'm sorry, now to Dr. Saman for some reflections on Saudi Arabia.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, in Saudi Arabia, we did actually carry on the implementation of the high-stake exams. Last year, during the high on the pandemic, for the high schools, and we utilized the online examination mechanism for more than 300,000 students around the countries. And the implementation, as in the case of in Colombia, take into consideration the authentication of the identity of students, the integrity of the exams. Also, it was very important to utilize these tools to measure to what extent in early months of the pandemic, the effect of the pandemic on education lost. However, as of the large scale assessment, we didn't implement what was scheduled for this year in the kingdom, but we are planning to do that in the coming September for the student in grade 3, 6, 8, and 12. And I think it will be very important to carry out this large-scale assessment at that time when students will physically returning to school. During the pandemic, students have been out of school in Saudi Arabia for the whole time, just utilizing the online learning. It was a national system that carry out education for all students across the kingdom. So I think it's very important to see the effect of that implementation, and also to measure and test our capacity to do this very extensive large-scale assessment to all students. Our plan is to include all students in these grades, all schools in these grades, with sample students in each school. So I think it will be a very big challenge, but we are looking forward to it in September. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Salman. And now we enter the final section of our panels. We ask Dr. Andrei Volkov, the director of the Moscow School of Management at Skolkovo, for some closing remarks.
Thank you. First of all, thank you everybody, for all participants and the experts for sharing with us this lunch event, sharing with us ideas, information, cases, and critical points sometimes. Thank you for all of you. First of all, I believe it's a great job that Margaret and Yoga and their efforts to summarize 10 years of experience and experiments under the umbrella of READ program. And I hope that this book will be somehow like a manual for many people who are making decisions in the different countries and different geographies in education. We already mentioned this discussion, and in book a lot of information about this. We already mentioned in this discussion all different dimensions for large-scale assessment. What I mean, yes, it's difficult to provide sufficient money, sufficient financial resources, but it's not. But it's, from my point of view, it's the easiest part of the game. Political decision, and Andreas mentioned this point, political decision even tougher, because sometimes the public announcement about results of this assessment, it's not just cheerful information, and sometimes it's disappointing information for society and for people who are making decisions. That's why political aspects or political dimensions of this program, of this assessment, is very important. Technical dimensions, very important for me, very important for all of us. And for my country, for example, it's a lot of efforts now making to train teachers and explains them and trains them properly to accept the result and to organize the large-scale assessment jointly with experts in a proper way. It's a challenge for my country as well, not only for other countries. Last but not least dimension, let's say in dimension number 4, we're discussing now, it's a content point of view. Andreas once again mentions this point as well. It's not just to provide our students a lot of information and knowledge, but we need to think future. What actually we would like to measure? What's inside of this measurement? And I believe we need to be able to estimate, to assess, to measure how people think, their thinking ability. And I believe this content point of view for large-scale assessment would be the next step for all this program. And at the end, I would like to very carefully express my hope that Russian government will accept and will launch the READ 3 program. And I believe this team, I believe all of you, for me, already like a team in the last 10 years to joint efforts. And we like a team of the big circle, the big community of experts and specialists can provide next step to develop large-scale assessment on a global level, international level, national and regional level. Once again, thank you, all of you, for sharing ideas, information, and once again, my congratulations for authors of this primer, of this book. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre, and thank you for the support and your friendship. I remember when we launched READ, the first phase in October 2008. So it's been a long journey, and it's been great that we could do this together. So let me now pass the word to Jaime for some closing words of wisdom. We've reached the end of our panel.
So thank you very much, Luis, and thanks to everyone who has joined us this hour and a half. Many thanks to Andre for this, for representing this long partnership with the READ Trust Fund and the Russian Federation to support all this work. There are many partners that have been working with us during the last years, including the OECD team, the UNESCO Institute of Statistics, and more importantly, the partners at the country level. Right? We have a few represented here, but this is just a sample of the critical partnership of working together to expand this agenda at the country level. I just want to mention a couple of points that I've heard during this discussion. First is that, I mean, we need to be also cognizant that we're living a war now, right? This is a long-term endeavor of learning how to measure learning properly in our countries, but at the same time, we're living a war, right? We have never lived the dramatic shock that we're living today. So hence the efforts that we've heard from Colombia, from Saudi Arabia, from Nepal, to see how to measure in a very pragmatic and very innovative way. I mean, what are being the learning losses today of children during the last year, many of which have not have received the right school stimulation, and we have had very long closures in many parts of the school closures in many parts of the world. We need to be extremely creative, right, and find different ways through which we can have a reasonable assessment. It might not be perfect, but a reasonable assessment of what has been the impact. And it's very important, the efforts that we heard, for instance, in the case of Colombia, how to use technology in a very efficient way, how to use technology or other means in order to make sure that we measure what's been the impact for everyone, including people with disabilities, and in other parts, including people, including refugees and all marginalized populations. We need to make sure that we really have a good measure of what has been the impact for people across the country. One of the key objectives of these efforts is to have a good assessment of what's happening with learning across the country, but also what are the differences within countries. critical challenge that we face is equity in educational opportunities, and an equity challenge that has been dramatically impacted by this crisis. So the efforts on that front are absolutely critical. And to finalize, I think the issue that Andre mentioned and that was mentioned since the beginning about the political commitment is absolutely essential. I mean, this is about good news, but it could be also about bad news, right? But actually, that's what systems needs and schools need in order to improve. So the addition to all the technical work and the communications work that is being laid out in detail in the book is the political commitment of all of us and of countries, right, in order to continue focusing relentlessly on the outcome, on monitoring the outcome, and act upon the data that we get. We have a group of what we call accelerator countries. There are countries that are committed to try to move the needle of learning in the short run. But the key first commitment of what we call the accelerator countries that are focusing on learning is to measure learning, to monitor what's going on, right? Set targets and act upon those that monitoring process and implement the policies that not only that can move learning in the long run, all the structural reforms that we need to do in education, but also what can we do with the resources that we have in order to change the teaching and learning process today of what's happening in the classrooms today. We have this two-pronged approach, right? We need to improve the structural challenges at the country level, but we really need to make an impact of what's happening in the classroom today, because there are kids in the classroom as we speak that need to receive the right opportunity. So thanks to everyone for this joint effort, and let's continue building together better systems for all our children and young people. Over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jaime, and thank you once again to our great panelists. Much, much appreciated. And as I said earlier, this is just skimming the surface. I hope that you all get a chance to take a deeper dive with the primer. Thanks to all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.